WVVA in Focus, a weekly program about important issues and events in the two Virginias.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of In Focus. I'm your host, Melinda Zosh. March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. Joining me right now via Zoom from Charleston, West Virginia is Sheila Moran, the Director of Communication and Marketing for 1-800-GAMBLER in West Virginia. Sheila, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Before we jump in, I would like to share some statistics with our viewers. The National Council on Problem Gambling says that here in West Virginia, about 1 in 50 people have a gambling problem. So why is gambling an issue here in West Virginia, Sheila?
Gambling is an issue, frankly, all over the world, certainly in the United States. In West Virginia, we have as most of the country, we have quite a bit of gambling available to people, and it's something that people start out doing for fun, and unfortunately for about 1 in 50 people here in the state, they end up really having a problem with it and becoming addicted.
And Sheila, where does West Virginia stack up against other states?
Every year Wallet Hub comes out with a study on the most gambling addicted states, and I think the last rating we were ranked 6th most gambling addicted. Part of that is based on the amount of gambling we have. We have 5 fully functional casinos, and we have about 1,200 video lottery parlors, and of course we have sports betting as well as online gaming available from mobile devices, even bingo, and of course lottery tickets. So part of it is based on that. Also, we rank, I believe we're first in per capita, per $1,000 in personal income being spent on gambling. So what that means is that we have, as a state, of course, we're rather a poor state, so we don't have quite as much money. And of that we have, people tend to spend more here on gambling products.
Right, and Sheila, as you mentioned, there's different ways for people to gamble. They can go out to a casino, they can do online betting. Talk to us more about what gambling entails and then also what betting or gaming also mean.
Sure. Well, that's interesting. That's a big topic of conversation these days. So gambling is risking anything of value to win something else, and it's primarily about luck, although of course there can be some skill involved. Think about maybe poker. Whereas gaming has traditionally referred to things like video games, things that have more of a degree of skill involved. However, in the last few years, gaming and gambling have really converged. Many games, even video games, have gambling elements. Think about social casinos, for instance, the type of things that you can play slot machines online for free. A lot of video games have loot boxes that many kids access and spend money on. And at the same time, a lot of gambling devices look much like the type of games that people play. So those two have really converged with skill and luck coming together, and frankly, I think it's probably going to be something indistinguishable in the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe there's someone out there who's watching who really is struggling with gambling or has a family member who's struggling. So tell us more about what 1-800-GAMBLER and what it does to help those who are struggling with this gambling addiction.
We are very proud of our 1-800-GAMBLER program. We have staff around the clock who answer the 1-800-GAMBLER line, and that is answered here in Charleston, but we are a statewide program. And then we have chat available as well at 1-800-GAMBLER.net. You'll get the very same people who are answering that hotline. So you're going to immediately talk to a crisis counselor, which is important because, as you can imagine, many people who call us are in crisis. Get a lot of calls from family members as well. About 30% of our callers are family members of people with a gambling addiction. So when they call us, we're going to debrief with them, we're going to engage with them, help them, figure out the next steps that they can take. And if they're ready for treatment, then we can arrange that. We have about 50 counselors statewide who are expertly trained in treating problem gambling. So we're going to link them with a counselor. We're going to pay for them to see the counselor for an initial consultation, and then we can continue to pay if for any reason they don't have insurance or they're unable to pay. pay. I should also note that telehealth is available. A lot of people don't want to leave their houses just yet, so we can arrange that. There are support groups, Gamblers Anonymous groups as well, and there are online support groups. So we provide all of that information. In addition, we have a lot of special events. We have at least twice a year, we have an in-person weekend retreat event where we have gamblers and their family members from all over the state come together for a weekend of fellowship and education, and that is open and free to anyone who calls us. So there's a lot available to people for free when they call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Right, and they can also remain anonymous, right, Sheila? And if they're worried about giving out their personal info and they just need help, an initial consultation,
Sure.
they can remain anonymous.
Sure, a lot of people call us and they're hesitant at first. Usually once we talk to them, they feel a little more comfortable, but certainly they can call us anonymously or chat anonymously as well.
And about how long does it take for someone to fix that gambling problem? I understand that some people are able to stop within the first 6 months of entering treatment, but can you talk about the pathway to getting this problem fixed?
Sure. The most important thing is getting into treatment quickly, and we're fortunately able to get most folks into treatment, an appointment within 1 to 3 days of their call. So after they begin that process, some people go every week, some people go just a few times. We pay for up to 20 times, and we do follow-up calls at intervals, and we find that when we get to the 6-month point, we're calling people, about 80% of them have either completely stopped gambling or they've significantly reduced it to the point that they don't feel it's a problem in their life anymore.
And Sheila, what are some signs that gambling has gone from something that people do just for fun or as a recreational activity to an actual problem or an addiction?
So we have what we call the rules of responsible gambling, and the first one is set a limit and stick to it. Most people can pretty easily set that limit, but it's the sticking to it part that's hard for them. So when you find that you're not sticking to that limit, you find you're making trips to the ATM or you're borrowing money from friends or family to gamble, that's one of the first things we see indicating someone may be going from recreational to problem gambling. Another key is if you find that you're lying to your friends, your family about gambling, about how much time you're spending gambling or how much money you're spending. And we've probably all known people who gamble who talk about how much they've won. But when you really question them about how much they've spent to get that, sometimes they say, well, maybe that's the case. We find that sometimes people actually end up lying to themselves as well as friends or family. So that's a key. Another really important thing that we find is that people who are addicted really obsess on gambling. They're preoccupied with it. So they're thinking about it all the time, day and night. Some people tell us that they dream about the bells and the whistles that they hear at casinos. For a full list of all of the symptoms, you can visit us at 1-800-GAMBLER.net. And you can also take a quiz online on that website anonymously to see how many symptoms that you have.
And Sheila, why do you think gambling addictions aren't taken as seriously as other addictions?
Gambling addiction really is not taken as seriously by most people. And we call it the silent addiction because often you can't see it, you can't smell it. It's different than someone who may have an alcohol or a drug problem. So it doesn't always get noticed as quickly. It is a behavioral addiction. And although all addictions, including substance use disorders, have an element of psychological addiction and behavioral addiction, gambling is, of course, completely that. There is no substance that you ingest. And so folks have a really hard time understanding how you can become addicted to something that you don't actually put in your body. But it's really not that different at all than people who are battling with drugs and alcohol. And the consequences really can be just as severe. Gambling addiction has one of the highest rates of suicidal ideation of any type of addiction.
And that's startling as far as the suicide rates are concerned as well. And Sheila, why is it, do you think, that people develop gambling problems or addictions?
There are some key risk factors because, of course, most people are able to gamble responsibly and not develop a gambling problem. So what studies have found is that there are risk factors. For instance, if you have a personal history of depression, anxiety, any type of mental illness, that can put you at higher risk. If you have a personal history of substance use disorder, we get a lot of calls from people who are many years in recovery from substance use disorder, and that it didn't occur to them that they could get addicted to gambling. And so that happens to them. So that is a significant risk factor. Another big risk factor is having an early big win. That's surprising to many people because you think, who doesn't want a big win in gambling? But what people often tell us is that after they have that initial win, it's such a wonderful feeling and such a high that they continue to gamble, so they continue to get that high again and again. Before you know it, they've spent all of their money and they're back where they started, and then they're digging a hole deeper and deeper. So for some people, that big win actually does not work in their favor and can be a risk factor for problem gambling.
And do people who have gambling problems, do they have other addictions too? Like, do they struggle with drug or alcohol related issues?
There is a strong comorbidity. So we find that many people who've struggled with drugs and alcohol in the past, they are at risk. And then, a lot of people tell us that while they're gambling, they're also drinking or using a drug. So that definitely those two things can certainly go together. We see that a lot.
All right, Sheila, we have to take a quick break. We have much more to talk about, including how COVID-19 has impacting gambling issues. We'll have more on this coming up right after this. Welcome back to this edition of In Focus. This morning, we're talking about Problem Gambling Awareness Month. That's what March is all about. We've been talking about some of the warning signs of gambling problems, and also 1 in 50 people here in the Mountain State struggle with gambling. And in just a bit, I want to share some statistics with you about southern West Virginia. But first, I'd like to bring back in Sheila Moran. She's with 1-800-GAMBLER. So Sheila, let's continue our conversation here. Are you seeing an increase of gambling, perhaps online gambling, since the pandemic started?
We have, when the pandemic started, we initially saw a big drop off of our calls, and then after the first couple months, they started really picking back up again. And I was just looking at our statistics this evening, and it used to be all of our calls, way back when, they all came from the casinos, and you could almost map where people were calling from that was near a casino. And then as we had video poker parlors around the state, you could see that they were more widespread. And that was typically, for most of our program, that has accounted for most of our calls: slot machines at casinos and video poker machines. However, in the last year, although those two are still at the top, coming in very close is online gambling. And so that's new. That hasn't been legal here for very long, and that's something that's we're definitely getting a lot more calls about. We're getting calls with people who are engaging in sports betting via mobile app. We're getting calls from people who are playing online games like roulette and poker, things like that you can now legally play online. And we're also getting calls from people who are running into trouble with day trading, using apps like the Robinhood app, and they're saying that they are it's becoming an addiction for them as well.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting about the sports betting too and the online gambling. And your website says that studies show that populations with easy access to gambling have higher rates of problem gambling than those who do not. So I used to live in Montana. When I was out there, there were a lot of slot machines at bars and restaurants, even gas stations. It seemed like there were slot machines everywhere for people to gamble. And Sheila, I haven't seen as many of those here in southern West Virginia. But would you say that they're still easily accessible for people in West Virginia, in this region and throughout the state?
They are. We may not be at the Montana level, but we do have, in addition to the 5 casinos, we have about 1,200 video poker parlors statewide. And of course, now that gambling is legal online, most people have a smartphone, and so really it's at your fingertips.
And Sheila, we have a map we'd like to share that I got from your website, 1-800-GAMBLER.net, and it shows where people are calling from the most who are dealing with problem gambling. And it looks like southern West Virginia has a higher number of callers compared to some other areas of the state. You can see our area just kind of lit up in red down here. Can you elaborate more on what you're seeing in the southern part of the state as far as problem gambling is concerned?
Right. So those folks, they may not necessarily be super close to a casino, depending on which county they're calling from. So they would be more likely to be playing at neighborhood video lottery parlors or using their smartphone to gamble. And we do get a lot of calls from people in the southern part of the state and rural part of the state. So it's very fortunate that we are able, if there's been one positive part of this pandemic, it's been the fact that telehealth has become very accepted, and a lot of people are doing that. So, we do have counselors in your area, but if folks don't want to travel at all, we can link them in with some telehealth there.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know about the telehealth as well. And so, Sheila, what is the solution to problem gambling? It sounds like someone needs, if they know that they have an issue or they think they might, they should call the 1-800-GAMBLER phone number and take that step. But what is the solution to getting this problem fixed?
We think one of the big solutions is prevention, and that's something we've been working at a lot this year. We partnered with nearly 20 different youth groups around the state to start talking to kids about gambling, because most schools and colleges have information and education programs for their students on things like drunk driving and using drugs, but gambling is really very rarely addressed. And when we've done surveys of middle school through college, youth tend to tell us that many of them say they think gambling is a good way to make money. And so that's very problematic. As I said, one of the number one rules of responsible gambling, aside from setting a limit and sticking to it, is treating the cost of money, the cost of gambling, as the cost of entertainment, meaning the way that you would spend money on a movie and understand you're not getting it back. When you spend it on gambling, you've got to understand you're not getting it back. It's not an investment. But what we're hearing from young people is that they do think it's an investment. They are seeing clearly the message that they can become rich doing this. So that's a real problem. We are trying as much as we can to get in front of as many youth groups in schools to try to get this message across.
And that's great that you brought that up, though, about younger people maybe struggling with gambling. What are you seeing as far as like demographics when it comes to gambling? Are there certain age groups who are more impacted, or even is it like a male versus female sort of thing? Or can you share more on the demographics of problem gambling?
Sure. I can tell you that youth actually are 2 to 4 times more likely to become addicted, and many people are quite surprised by that. It's a variety of reasons. A lot of times they're naive about the odds, and they're just a vulnerable population. Now, we don't get many calls from young people here. Most of our calls would come from more of the middle-age sect, and that just may be who's more likely to reach out to a helpline. As far as gender, we always say it's an equal opportunity disorder, unfortunately, men as well as women. Up until this year, we had nearly 50-50 male and female, and that may be due to the type of gambling we have. The type of gambling, slot machines and video poker machines, tend to appeal to women a lot. They're an escape type of gambling. But just this last year, for the first time, that's tilted a little, and we had more men call than women. And that may be because some of the new types of gambling, such as sports gambling, may appeal more to men than to women.
All right, thank you, Sheila. We do have to take one more quick break. Much more to talk about. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to this edition of In Focus. March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month, so we've been talking about who might be impacted by problem gambling, statistics here in West Virginia, and so much more. I'd like to bring back in Sheila Moran with 1-800-GAMBLER. And Sheila, can you explain to us more about how gambling really impacts an individual, maybe mentally, maybe even physically, and also how that addiction impacts those family members and people close to them?
Sure. Gambling addiction really can be devastating to someone. Of course, the initial thing you think about are finances. Yes, by the time people call us, many have filed bankruptcy once, even twice. Many are in a lot of debt, tens of thousands of dollars in debt. Many have maxed out their credit card. It's not unusual at all for us to hear someone say that they've been fired from a long-time job because they've stolen from their job to finance their gambling. It's not unusual for us to hear from people who are saying that their spouse or loved one is ready to end the relationship and leave them because of their gambling. And as far as loved ones, about 30% of our callers are loved ones of gamblers, and that's usually the spouse or romantic partner, but it can be, an adult child or a parent. And what they're telling us is that they feel really more of an impact sometimes than the gambler. You can imagine we've had calls from, for instance, people who say, I'm getting ready to retire and I open my 401k, and lo and behold, my spouse has forged my signature and taken it all out and spent it all on gambling. Gee, I had no idea that our house was mortgaged for a second time. I thought we owned the house and now we're losing the house. And so you can imagine how upset family members are to be in that type of situation. And we hear that on a daily basis. So definitely very devastating. That's one of the reasons why we're one of the few programs in the country to offer treatment specific for loved ones of gamblers, because sometimes they need just as much support as the person struggling with gambling. And frankly, a lot of times it turns into a marital therapy type of situation because it's strained the relationship so much.
And Sheila, what does that treatment for loved ones consist of? I can imagine that if someone's spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend is gambling, they might also be lying to that person about what they're doing, and that could really take away some trust there. Can you explain how someone whose maybe loved one has struggled with gambling, how they get through that and get through those trust issues?
Sure. So a lot of times when people call us, they're asking how can they stop their loved one from gambling. So our counselors often meet with them to discuss intervention strategies and to just let them know what type of help that their loved one can expect and help them arrange that. The other thing that our counselors work a lot with folks on is enabling. And a lot of people are used to bailing out their spouse or loved one. And no one ever says, give me money to gamble. They might say, give me money because I need groceries or rent or whatever. And so a lot of times with completely good intentions, people are enabling the person that they love. And so sometimes our counselor works with them to make sure that that's not going on. And really, sometimes gamblers will tell us that the best thing that ever happened to them was their loved one stopped enabling them. They had to face the consequences of their disorder, and they were moved to get help.
And also, it seems like to the normal person who's never had a gambling problem, one would think, well, gee, I'm losing money. Why would I keep going back again and again? Can you explain more behind why someone who does have a gambling problem, even though they're losing, they keep going back for more? Can you explain that to us?
Sure. One of the things we always say to people is it's not about the money, and that's a big misconception. A lot of people are gambling because they're trying to escape a pain. Sometimes it's an emotional pain. Sometimes it's a physical pain. We've had people, for instance, with back pain say, I sat there on that stool for 5 hours and all of my pain was erased. And it's because their mind is so otherwise engaged in something else. So that can happen, as well as people who are dealing with emotional issues. A lot of people will tell us that they gambled recreationally without a problem, and then something happened in their life, some sort of significant event. Maybe they got a divorce, their children went off to college, they lost a job, and at that point the gambling became problematic, and they really felt like that was all that they had left in life. A lot of times people also, if depending on the type of gambling they do, this maybe wouldn't apply so much to mobile gambling, but if you're talking about a social situation where you're going to bingo or a casino, a lot of people say they go because it is social for them, and they become friends with the people around them, the people who work there, and that's something that they enjoy. So, if it's to a point that they have an addiction, one of the things our counselors work with them on is developing other hobbies, other outlets for their pain, and other ways to just work through these issues without gambling.
And Sheila, we have just about a couple minutes left in this segment. So do you have any concluding thoughts for our viewers, maybe someone out there who's watching who maybe is struggling with gambling or has a loved one who is struggling just to get through this addiction?
Sure. You know, we tell a lot of stories about how bad it can get about people losing their homes, losing their spouses, their jobs. But, you know, it doesn't have to get that bad. You know, as soon as you're at the point where you can see that you're spending more time or more money gambling than you planned, and it's time to reevaluate that. And don't hesitate to call us. You're under no obligation at all. At the very least, you'll get a free conversation with someone who is an expert in gambling addiction and can give you some guidance and help you figure out where you're at in this and what you need to do to move forward. So don't let it get that bad before you decide to call. You're under, as I said, no obligation, and you really have nothing to lose at all by calling us. You can call us completely anonymously, and it is free.
Right, and as you mentioned, it is anonymous, Sheila, and there is a website available where you can chat as well. So, Sheila, I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing more information with our viewers here in Southern West Virginia and Virginia about problem gambling. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to let our viewers know that we're always looking for in focus ideas. So if you have an idea, if you'd like to be featured on this show, it's really about people and events in the two Virginias. You can send me an email, mzosh at WVVA.com, and I'll look forward to receiving those emails. But I hope you gained some insight about how gambling can go from something recreational to an addiction, and there is help, there are resources available. That does it for this edition of In Focus. We hope you have a great day. See you again next Sunday.